Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see a good crowd. This is our first regular event of the summer. Our first event was the folk art event at the Bradleys, and it was fantastic. It went really, really great. And I decided last year I needed to do the Bailey's Harbor Fire Department because I would read little things about it, and I had no idea what a gigantic topic it is. So what you hear tonight is just going to be a little bit. It won't even begin to address the hundreds of people who have been involved over the years, but I hope it'll give you an overview of how the department has developed. And that's my disclaimer. So if I forgot anybody, or I don't give credit to somebody, I'm sorry. I did the best I could. And if you have more information, the Historical Society wants it so that we can put it in our archive for the future. I need to give a thank you to, this is alphabetical, Fred Anderson, former fire chief, Samantha at York London, Elaine Bonneville for a picture, Melanie Haas for a lot of information, Sharon Hunnell for information and pictures, Joe and Jerry Katursky. You might have noticed a red fire truck sitting out in the parking lot. And that's the original Bailey's Harbor fire truck from 1935. The Tursky boys bought it from Don Gerbman, well, quite a few years ago. I'm not sure exactly how many. And they were also generous with pictures. Maureen McGrath stepped up to help with refreshments today, and we thank her for that always. Mark Merrill, who is actually, you might think he's a first responder and a fireman, but he's actually a walking encyclopedia. You may not have known that. Gary and Peg Nelson were very generous with information and with artifacts also. Doris Parent found a long-lost picture of Clarence Mann for me. Don Proust has donated his, well, not donated, but lent us his first turnout coat, which is hanging over here. And if any of you kind of wonder what it's like to fight fires, just try that turnout coat on. And then picture wearing it in the middle of a fire. I mean, it could bring you to your knees. And Brian Zock, our current fire chief, who also, he has been incredibly busy lately, what with kayak rescues and the 4th of July and all that, but he still was able to take time to talk, and as was Don Proust, who's another former fire chief, and he supplied us with a lot of information and his coat and a lot of newspaper articles. I didn't want to forget those people, so now we're starting for real. This is from our Facebook page, Bailey's Harbor Fire and Rescue Facebook page that Brian set up. He said the fire and rescue lies in the center of the Door Peninsula. The department covers approximately 32 square miles, 26 miles of Lake Michigan shore, 2 inland lakes, and Bailey's Harbor is part of a mutual aid agreement with all Northern Door departments, as well as an automatic aid agreement with Ephraim and Gibraltar. It's called Mid-Door Fire. A community without a nearby trained firefighting and rescue agency is at the mercy of the lightning fire, the careless match, the shorted out electrical system. A garden hose or a bucket brigade simply doesn't have the power to extinguish an established fire. And as I was researching through the years, I noted that there seemed to be 4 components that contributed to the current success of our Bailey's Harbor Fire and Rescue, and maybe any fire and rescue. First, the big change in manpower and training. Back when the department started, there was some training. They said they would train when they got the fire truck and so forth. But I would presume it's somewhat minimal, and I don't think overseen by larger agencies with precise lists of what sorts of things you have to do. Second, communications. Somebody's got to know where that fire is. They have to know how to get there, and they have to know how to coordinate. Third, equipment. And we have an impressive array of equipment. And even with that, sometimes we fail. And fourth, the availability of water. When we're sitting here in Bailey's Harbor, we say, well, water, no problem. But if you're even at, the intersection of double E and F, water could be a very big problem. And that's part of the expansion of equipment. And it's why rural departments often need larger trucks than you sometimes see in a city department, where they have hydrants all over. I'm going to try and highlight those areas as we talk and show how they've developed over time. Now, first, I have to tell you, this is not the actual picture of this fire. But I found a picture that's the way I imagine it probably looked. In 1868, it was a heavy gale from the northeast. Fires spread into the town, destroying 4 houses, 2 barns, a cooper shop, fences, wood posts, and more. Dozens of cords of wood, several acres of wheat were lost. And it said it was only by continuous hard work that the other buildings and the piers were saved. And that hard work probably consisted of bucket brigades, and I would imagine digging ditches around properties, so the fire couldn't leap over. Now, the Higgins Pier in Frogtown, if you're familiar, so when you go around the bend in Frogtown, used to be a huge pier there. And a lady, Dora Higgins, was able to write telling what it was like during that fire. Her parents took everything they could out of the house and moved it to the end of the pier, hoping they could save it. It was reported after this fire in Sturgeon Bay, I think a ship went through, and they said, Bailey's Harbor is gone. It's wiped off the face of the earth. The whole thing is burned to the ground. But later, a new message came, and they said, no, Bailey's Harbor is not gone, but they lost a lot. Miles Carrington's house was burned, and all of his cooper shop, he was a cooper, and all of that. And so afterwards, he was partly covered by insurance, and so afterwards they hastily built what is now the Red Geranium, which we often refer to as the Toft House. So that's been there since 1869, and might be, I'm sure it is definitely one of the very oldest buildings in town. And they were saved, the day was saved, as so often years ago, by a heavy rain that followed the fire. And the Higgins, I believe, were fine after that. This is another spectacular fire that happened in the early days. No fire department. Pruder's Mill, which is behind the present Keno Garage. At that time, that 50-year-old mill, lumber, flour, grain, and feed valued at $25,000, burned in just 2 hours. The Advocate reported that even the most efficient bucket brigade had no chance of containing the fire. It happened when Mr. Strag was going to start the motor that provided electric lights, and there was a backfire. It caused the fire to start. He barely got out with his life. And although they did have fire extinguishers in the building, you note that it's in February, the extinguishers had frozen. And so they were of no use at all. And one of the interesting, little historical tidbits about this is that Carl Pruder, just maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks previous, had turned down purchasing fire insurance. It was a hard day for Carl, I think. This was one of the largest mills in northern Door County. This was another big fire in 1928, right across the street here. And I think the building itself, this is an early picture of it. I think it might have been there might have been a little bit more to it. On the site of Nelson Shopping Center, was a $10,000 blaze. It started in the second story, and the August Brand was the owner of that, and he always thought that it started because they had, I think, tents for, it couldn't have been the Boy Scouts, they weren't started yet, but some kind of children's tents for camping out. And to keep them waterproof, they would put, I don't know what they were soaked in, some kind of oil, and they thought it was sort of like a spontaneous combustion. It got very, very hot, and it just lit itself, but nobody really knows. Yes? Oh, okay, well then that is probably exactly what he did. It sounds like an idea he might have had. Interesting. In case you didn't hear, Patty just said that when she was writing about the Frogtown art colony, she came across information that they had rented tents from the Brand Brothers store. So I'm guessing those were the tents, probably. It's the timing, they've probably been laying up there for 4 or 5 years after that. Well, a large number of townspeople came to fight the fire. And finally, it was spreading. It looked like it was going to spread, so they called Sturgeon Bay to come help. Sturgeon Bay had just returned from fighting a $50,000 fire in Valmy, which was like 4 or 5 or 6 buildings. And they, I guess they must have filled up with water. They turned around and tore down the road. I think somewhere I read that they ripped along at 50 miles an hour to get there, but by the time they got there, really all they could do was, just add some water to the ashes and make sure it didn't spread. And is this building close to water? Yes, but there was nothing to, there was no real equipment. Sorry, no picture of this. I couldn't find one that I could pretend was this. This is known as the Burnt Hollow Fire in August of 1935. It was on the McCardle estate around the area of York, London, Chapel Lane. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that area. It was a brush fire, and it had raced out of control. From what I've read, it was a really black, smoky fire. You could hardly see anything in it. And in that fire, Gus Carlson suffered, I said a broken leg in the Advocate, but his son reports it was actually a broken ankle. And Eric John, who was a dentist in town at the time, also went to fight it, and I think he had to be treated for smoke inhalation. And they sort of semi-got it under control. Sister Bay, Ephraim, and Fish Creek tried to contain it, but the following morning, it was again rain that really put the end to that fire. And the next, yes, ma'am?
That fire went where the Welcome to Bailey's Harbor sign is, where it's kind of a cleared area. That's where it went through, right in that area.
Okay, Chris Shore just added that when you're coming into Bailey's Harbor, driving north, where that Welcome to Bailey's Harbor sign is, that is the area where it started sweeping through. It was a big space that covered. Well, this prompted, now this remembers 1935. Towns did have fire equipment. We did not. And so they had a town meeting the following week and came to the conclusion that they were going to get a fire truck and fire equipment. And they did purchase a truck. And here's that hard to find picture of Clarence Mann, who was the town chairman. A lot of things went on under Clarence. I believe he oversaw the paving of Ridges Road, known as the Station Road at that time, and a number of other things I've read about. He and Bernard Betcher, who was the owner of the Ford dealership in town, that's that building just south of Nelson Shopping Center that they use for storage, and various things. And they got together. Donald Boynton was a real driving force behind this, from what I can tell. And he put people in his office. He worked at Pure Oil. to work getting estimates, getting bids from many different companies and so forth. And they finally decided on a Peter Pierce fire truck, like the state-of-the-art latest thing. Ephraim has a similar fire truck that they have totally restored, which is in one of the pictures over there for the Bill Weberg funeral. And you can see, how fabulous it worked. And Bernard did a good job for the Ford dealership, too, because he convinced the town to have it put on a Ford chassis that they would buy through him. And that little blue square there is nothing against Bernard. I can see him in my mind's eye, but I cannot find one single person that has a picture of him. His family lost all their stuff in a flood, I think in a basement or something, and you know how that can be. Now, this is not our truck, but this should be very, very close to how our truck looked in its heyday. Joe and Jerry have it running. They just have it, outside Florian's a lot of the time. And when I kid him about it, he says, "Here, you take the key. You can go take a ride." It starts right up. And so I guess it does. The cost of the truck, the original stated cost was $4,408. And I believe they got some discounting and so forth, and I think it was a little over $3,000 when they finally purchased it. And there was talk always about this committee of summer residents and townspeople who were buying the truck and all. But I think that considering the thank yous and so forth and how it was handled, I think the Boynton family basically bought that truck for the town of Bailey's Harbor. And this you can't read it all, I know that. But this is a copy of a thank you letter to Mr. and Mrs. Boynton that was written by the dentist, Dr. John, who was secretary to the fire committee. And what this letter does is it kind of lays out even how we are today. They said they decided this would be a totally volunteer fire department. He listed the officers of the first fire department. He told them that they had this plan, which I think was just a tiny bit of a pipe dream, that they were going to store the fire truck beneath the town hall that was being built. I think they had this idea that somehow they were going to fashion an underground storage for it. Well, that never happened. I'm sure the architect of the town hall, and all that just wasn't going to happen. And of course, they thanked profusely the Boyntons and said that any suggestions that they had to further the cause would be taken into consideration, and that the town was very grateful for something they needed very much. And here are our first fire officers. Some of you may remember these people, and many of you may have never heard of them or seen them. Arnie Pruder was the brother of Carl Pruder of the mill with no fire insurance. And Henry Schultz had a great deal to do with building the town hall. He supervised a lot of WPA projects during the Depression. I remember him well from when I was a little girl. And then, of course, Bernard Betcher. I guess you will have to have your own picture of him if you didn't know the man. I can see him clearly in my head. But those were the three first officers. And so we're faced with this problem right away. Where are we going to put this beautiful, spanking new, gorgeous red fire truck in Bailey's Harbor? And this is a little quote from the letter I just showed you. This is a picture of Dr. John, who lived in town at the time. I'm sorry it's not the best quality, but that's what we had. He said, arrangements were made to build a place for housing the machine under the town hall. Temporarily, it's being kept at the Betcher garage, because you had to have a place, big enough to house it. And he was one of the officers, so it probably made sense. Here were two other early, I think I'm not sure how long Arnie Pruder was the fire chief. I think there was another one after him in the late 40s, the late 30s. I'm not positive about it. But when my dad built, well, now Lauren Pyle tells me that he remembers a fire truck being stored up by my home on Howard Street in that garage. But eventually my parents built the Taste and Tattle restaurant, which is on your right, and the Beer and Liquor Depot, and those two big overhead doors, of garage and so forth. And I remember it being stored there for a lot of years when I was growing up. Sometimes they would put it in the lower building, the roof of which you can see on your left there. And that's Otto John, who was the chief. And I believe at that time, and even maybe for a long time, if you could house the fire truck, you were the chief. And I know he really was the chief. I've lost this little card that he had that said he belonged to the Wisconsin Fire Chief Association and everything. I've lost that. I don't know what I did with it. So I know he really was the chief. And then he became ill and was hospitalized until the end of his life for a few years with tuberculosis. And so there's no chief, so we had to find another place to keep the fire truck. And Gordy Nelson, if you remember from our Nelson Shopping Center program, had dug out by hand a basement under his store, and it was measured, it would fit, and the fire truck was stored down there for many years. And there are lots of stories about that Gary has to tell, how they, inspectors came and said, "You can't store a fire truck down here. It's like a fire hazard." but so what? I have the fire truck. So anyway, stayed there for a long time. And Gordy was chief for a good many years. Now in 1964 and 65, they built the first, the east side, the right-hand side of the firehouse. And in later years, the center, this west side, and then there's, I guess, room in the back also, quite extensively. And in that first section, they had the foresight. This was just such news to me. Couldn't believe it. There's a 20,000-gallon water cistern under the floor so that water can be gotten easily to fill trucks. And then when it empties, it just like fills from a well, as I understand it. And let me see. Oh, the first addition to the building was erected around 1989 and 90. And according to Fred Anderson, former chief, room in the back was added afterwards. So now we have a firehouse. The biggest problem that came with the fire truck has been solved. But there are other problems. So that, that goes with the equipment. If you have a firehouse, you have a place to keep things, you have a place to meet, you have a place to train, you have just a lot of things that are kind of enveloped in having a location. And this is one of my favorite developments in the fire department. I remember growing up here. This was in the 50s. I was like in grammar school all through the 50s, so that's where we're at here. The fire truck would either come out of our garage or Nelson's. It would park in the intersection, and it would blow its siren and ring its bell for a long time. And people would come running to go to the fire. They'd come running out of Paul's Glass Bar. They'd come running out of the Nelson's. Anybody who was going by and heard it would do that. And at the same time, the phone operator, who was the person who got the fire call, they were sitting at the corner of Howard and Highway 57 in where the Door Shakespeare is just recently taken over. And they were sitting up high and they could see a lot, and they would call people they knew would go fight the fire. And if you heard all that commotion at your house, you could just, crank your phone, the operator would answer, and then you just ask, "Where's the fire?" And then they would tell you. And that's how people communicated to get to fires. Then in the late 50s, there were fire phones. There was like a second line in the houses of firefighters, people who belonged to the department, and the operators would ring those phones, and they had a very distinctive ring. They would go ring, 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 and they would just keep doing that until someone picked it up. And they could kind of talk to each other, make a plan, get together, find out where to go and so forth. And they would also see that the siren on the fire station was set off. I don't know if any of you heard that go off ever. It still works, and I think maybe once a year they test it to make sure that it goes off. And at that time, you called 839-2313 if you had a fire. You got little stickers to put on your phone, and it would take you, to the right place. Later, in '83, we switched over to 911. When you call 911, you get the sheriff's department in Sturgeon Bay. And today, all the volunteers, rather than having fire phones and so forth, I think they started with pagers. I think they now all have radios. They can confer with each other, meet at the firehouse or somewhere else, whatever is necessary. Now, Mark, did I get that pretty correct? All right, then I'm satisfied. So you can see the difference and why we have such fast response to everything, because now, they've carefully honed it into a real efficient system. Here's another famous fire, and somebody asked me today, don't you have a Florida club? For those of you who don't recall, this was the Florida club the day before the fire. Well, maybe not exactly, but that's how it looked. And Florian apparently thought Florian, Ada, Florida, palm trees. And so it was a very fun nightclub and restaurant. And indeed, I can honestly say I was actually there the day before the fire, enjoying myself with a friend, and was very shocked the next day when I got up and there was no more Florida Club. Fortunately, excuse me, I talk so much I forget to turn my pages. Sorry about that. It was a huge fire for the fire department to fight. And is it right on the water? Yes, it is. And there is the fire truck out on the dock pumping water. And everybody in here is saying, oh my gosh, look at how high the water is. Aren't you? Everybody I've shown this picture to, they don't care about the fire truck. They just say, look at that water. It's amazing. They pumped from the lake, but their hoses got clogged up. And so then, while they're fixing that problem, they pumped from the swimming pool. And then they went back to the lake again. But unfortunately, that is what remained. Yeah, it was really sad. I think Joe told me that he got out of there with a pair of pants, and what he had on his back and a pair of pants. And they think they saved like one chair out of the club area. It was pretty rough. Well, I think the palm trees saved themselves, actually. I don't know. They were kind of metal. I know those leaves were metal. And I don't know what the socks were, but it makes for kind of an interesting visual at any rate. Okay, now as the fire department rolls along, in 1983, we begin getting first responders. So it's not just fighting fires. Now we have people to help you if you're in distress. And they're now called emergency medical responders. They undergo about 60 hours of training, and they're able to assess your situation, get your medical history, they can give you oxygen, they can perform CPR, but they can't administer any drugs or transport you. They kind of get people set, so the next level can kick in. And I was very pleased to learn. This is a big learning curve for me. In my mind, first responders, EMTs, and paramedics were like all the same thing. I had no differentiation at all. But I did learn from Mark that EMTs have much more training. They can do more things. And then if they continue to study, you can study to become a paramedic, which is a paid position up here. The Sister Bay ambulance, responders are paramedics, and they have a regular full-time position. Our first responders it's all volunteer. If they show up, and they do, from what I understand, they show up almost before you hang up the telephone. And I see people, yes, you are correct. That's totally volunteer. None of them may show up. It could be another level that'll show up, or it could be the paramedics, but somebody will be there for you. And I think it's kind of amazing. And I think it was, I cannot remember if it was Fred Anderson, Chief Fred Anderson, or Chief Don Proust who was telling me that they have one class. It was their first class. And the very next morning, they were called to Gordy Brand's house. He had what proved to be a fatal heart attack, shoveling snow. And, everybody, he's a man everybody knew in town, and he was very, I think, well thought of. And so the person who was telling me was sort of like, wow, that was really a rough thing to just to have that teeny bit of knowledge and being called on for something as big as that. This got started because Gary, as I understand it, thought it would be really cool if all the fire guys had first aid training. And he talked to the technical college, and they said, no, you need to have them become first responders. And he thought that was a great idea, so he went ahead and pushed for that. And I think we have many, many people who are very grateful that he did that. I think that was one of the big things that came out of his being the fire chief. Let me see, where am I? Oh, and also, sorry, back we go. 911 service was started then. And it took a little bit of doing to get people into that 911 mode. Of course, I lived in the city, so that's all we knew. But we were up here one summer, and my daughter went to visit a friend, and the friend's father had collapsed, and he was by himself. And she just dialed 911. And fortunately, it was just like in that first year that they had it, so they showed up in no time flat. So I think for a year or so, they kind of doubled, that call 839-2313, whatever that number was. They kept that going for about a year of overlap. And then they went, just to 911. In the late 90s, Chief Nelson was concerned that we might not be able to muster enough individuals to do a proper job fighting a fire. And so he and the Ephraim and Gibraltar fire departments made an agreement. They call themselves the Mid-Door Fire Group. And if there's a fire call, all of those groups respond to it as though it's their own town, unless they get a call saying, no, we've got it under control, or, everything's okay. There's also the cooperative, the mutual aid group, which is all northern Door County. But this is like a little special group that just gives us that little added layer of protection. Now, times are changing as we're going through the 80s and the 90s and all that. So here we have our first female member of the fire department, Melanie Haas. She's, you probably see her if you ever frequent the Cornerstone. She's a waitress over there. And she was the first female department member. She started as an EMTD, which I'm told stands for defibrillator, something that she was allowed to do. And she was a senior first responder for about 5 years. She also became a commercial building fire inspector. And let's see, other female firefighters that came on board were Colleen McCurdy, Vicki Proust, and I know there are some others, but I am just not sure of who they are. I haven't been able to find that out. And they had to train. They had to train just like the men. And Vicki became, and is currently, the crew chief for the first responders, following Sharon Hunold, who had that position for, I think, 16 years, and she ended in 2009. And I think you still respond, right, Sharon? Yeah. And this might take a minute, but I sent some questions to Melanie, asking her, like I was real curious, you know, being like in college in the 60s and stuff and working in the early 70s. I was just wondering if she had difficulties being the first woman in the fire department. Because you think, well, it's sort of a remote area, you know, maybe people just aren't so up to date and all that sort of thing. And she wrote me a really wonderful little letter back, and she said it wasn't difficult to enter the department. And she says she 100% attributes that to Gary Nelson. He made sure she was treated with respect and equality. And she said that everybody gave her a fair shot. And she told how Jim Anschutz took her under his wing. He was in charge of the engines. And she said she trained on pump operations every chance she got. And when she was done, she was up to a level 3 engineer. So they don't call it that anymore, and I don't really know what that is, but it sounds like it would be hard. She said, Mark, Merrill, and I were also the first commercial building fire inspectors, and they'd go around to businesses to make sure they were up to fire code and help them make corrections if necessary. She said, I spent my first Mother's Day fighting the grass fire that engulfed the Mud Lake Wildlife Refuge off of Stone Mill Road. I'll never forget being all dressed up to go to brunch with my family and getting the call. No time to change. I threw my gear on over my clothes. My nylons were shredded, and I had hardly any skin left on my legs from my boots rubbing on them for 10 hours. She said, I took my level 2 practical test when I was 8 months pregnant. That included the roof climb and the dummy carry in full gear. I did have my doctor's blessing to continue all the activities that I was doing, and she said I never felt better. And she talks about you know, the wonderful memories that she's had. And it's too touching, I can't read the rest. That's sort of how I am, I'm sorry. It's really sweet. Maxwell and Braze had the distinction of 2 gigantic, humongous fires. Sorry about the sort of fuzzy picture, but it's what was at hand. It was built in 1929 by Mike McCardle. It's an iconic Bailey's Harbor landmark. It burned in 1984 to the tune of about $1 million and was rebuilt by Harry and Lois Ridings. I was reading one of the news articles I put out for you where it talks, I think Gary was interviewed for this fire, and he said they had not just our tankers, but they had all kinds of private tankers. They had Lauren Pyle's tanker, and gosh, I can't even remember. I remember his name because, like, he's my neighbor, you know. But there were all kinds of tankers. They went to Kangaroo Lake, and they said they could fill their tanker like just in minutes and race back to the fire with it. And they did save about half of the building that time. But it was just, it's fascinating to read. If you get an opportunity before you go, just kind of look for that little news article. He lists all the people who were there. I can just see that line. You know, Kangaroo Lake's about 2 miles from Maxwell, and just that line of tankers going back and forth and everything. And then another fire occurred there in September of 1997, which I love this story. It was called in by a golfer at 6:20 in the morning. Why you'd be out anywhere at 6:20, I don't know, but people do it. Every department in Northern Door County worked to extinguish the blaze, and they got it out by 7:30 a.m. It was noted that foursomes of golfers just continued to play. You know, the fire trucks were there, the tankers, probably the dump tank and all that sort of thing. But they just walked around it, I guess. It was rebuilt again, and it continues today as lodging, still the golf course there, and of course Pasta Vino, the restaurant. It's a spunky building. And then here comes the really spectacular. On my program here, I don't have any pictures of the yacht club fire, but if you had a chance to look at our display, Christy was the photographer extraordinaire there, and she got some incredible photographs of the yacht club fire. It was pretty horrendous. It was discovered at 7 a.m., brought under control by 9 a.m., and they thought it was a chimney fire. There was Egg Harbor, Jacksonport, Gibraltar, Ephraim and Sister Bay, and Liberty Grove all turned out to fight it. Firefighters stayed from 5 p.m. until 5 p.m. to be sure it was really out, and even so, it managed to rekindle at 9:45 p.m. and finish the job of completely demolishing the building. And as I'm looking across the crowd here, I know that there are a whole lot of you that feel the same way I do. I mean, what wonderful times we had out there. It was very sad. And to continue with the wonderful 1990s, York, London, another kitchen fire. And like in the beginning, you need protection from those shorted wires. This was the Boyntons' original summer home. And the irony here, of course, is they bought the fire truck, the first fire truck. And even so, Lawrence University owned it by this time. And they had to finally bulldoze it. There are pictures. I went out there to see if they had, fire pictures and before pictures and so forth, and they did. I chose this one to just show how it's, the charred look of it, how it's behind the fence. And the facility that they've replaced it with is spectacular. But inside, all the murals that Winifred Boynton had painted and all that special furniture and everything's like, you just can't replace things like that. It was a real loss. But I think Bjork, Linden, Lawrence has done everything it can, to keep the same flavor of things and so forth. Now, I got my schooling from this from Mark, too. And one of my big questions for him was, well, I get that we have water here, but what do you do when you go out to a farm? What do you do when you go to a house that's in the middle of the peninsula? You can only carry so much water. And he explained that we now have 2 pumpers that hold 250 to 300 gallons, tankers, 2 of them that hold 2,500 gallons. We can get water from that 20,000-gallon cistern at the fire station. They get water from Lake Michigan. There's a dry hydrant by the marina. They use Kangaroo Lake. That's a frequent source in that area. And depending on the season and the amount of water available and stuff, they can sometimes use Rebolt's Creek and Langer's Creek up on 57. But because of the mutual aid agreements and the mid-door agreement, other fire departments come roaring in with their tankers too. So they may have as much as 40,000 gallons of water available. And then he also explained that they have, which this was just total news to me, they have what's called a dump tank. It's a portable, giant water container that they can empty a tanker right in there, and the tanker can immediately take off to go fill itself again. So there's a lot more water available than you might think. And that's why, we have these huge fire trucks, because you got to get the water there. This is a picture that Sharon brought in, and I have a whole poster there of several pictures from, just so you know that our volunteer firemen risk a lot. And Bill Weberg was Which fire department was he with, Sharon? Ephraim Fire Department. He was in process of responding and had a fatal heart attack. And the fire departments, there's a huge protocol for a funeral for a firefighter. And I tried to select pictures for that little board over there that would show you some of the different fire departments that responded and some of the things that they did to honor him. And this, I must say, this picture is the one and only picture of all the people I have pestered and harassed and asked of the fire department, of any year, of any time. Because I've figured out that since it's volunteer, the only time they really get together is where they're either training or they are at a crisis situation where you don't, go around and just hold that, just stay right just like that. I need to get your picture. It doesn't happen. And they're a mess probably at the end of it, so who wants your picture taken? But I've been talking to Brian. I said, you have to get everybody together every year. You need to take that picture. People want to see it. They want to know who to thank. Here's one of the things that Don Proust and Brian Zock started, and it's the annual 4th of July pancake breakfast. Funding is not always out there to the extent you'd like it to be for fire equipment and gear, because we need more than those round bottom buckets now. Our firemen have to fight forest fires, house fires, electrical fires, chemical fires, name the kind of fire, and they have to be able to do all of it. And this takes a lot of stuff, to execute what has to be done. So they raise money every year, and I was actually talking to Brian's wife, Kelly, and she was as excited about the pancake breakfast as Brian was, and they had a goal this year. They wanted to serve 900 breakfasts, and I think they went just over it to 905 or 908 or something like that. So when you take a little time that 4th of July morning and go over to the pancake breakfast, that money that you're paying is going to buy something. He told me that they finished paying off one of the trucks. I'm not sure which truck. It was a brush truck, but it was not a great big thing. But they finished paying that off, and I believe they were able to purchase like a utility vehicle so that they can get, they also have to have vehicles so they can get in the woods and down those little crazy paths and over rough terrain, because all of that comes into play when you live in a rural area. So I promised him I'd be sure and plug that pancake breakfast today. I think it's a great idea. He's proud of it, and he says, something, we're happy to work hard. We're happy to work hard. We want to do things to make it better. And I thought that was pretty admirable, because I think that what they do just without the pancake breakfast is pretty darn hard. Now, I know these are little pictures, but I just didn't want to put 10 slides of different trucks up. You'll notice, if you look down the left-hand margin here, we have a 93 rescue pumper, a 96 tanker, a 2001 tanker, 2006, and you get in here and you're just like, oh, these are like 5 years. Every 5 years, it looks like we have a new thing. And that was one of the contributions that Don Proust made. He felt that you just don't want to wake up one day and find out that you have 3 of these gigantic things that you have to buy. So they're on a rotating purchase so that we're always pretty up to date, which I think is a very smart idea. And also then when you sell the one you have to replace it, it's not like 50 years old. And it probably, you manage to do much better selling those to get money to buy the next item. And our newest member, in the lower right-hand corner, I had to go over and look at the water rescue boat. Now, I don't know if you've all seen that. I know it's all serious and everything, and they train on it. They were out in some freezing cold lake last week training on it. But I went over to look at it because I had never seen it, and I just thought, well, if that isn't the cutest thing I've ever seen. And it is. It's kept at the marina down here. It's gorgeous. It's bright yellow. It just looks as sleek and fast as it could possibly be. And this is our latest addition to the fire department. I think it was added in 2011. So now we're also qualified to do water rescue. And guess where it was last week? It was in Green Bay looking for those kayakers. When you take it out, I've been told, you have to have a couple of first responders on it. There's not, I guess, much point otherwise. And now the traditions. Our current chief is Brian Zock, and here's a picture of him with his son, Cam, who's also in the fire department. And their dad on the left, Willard Zock, the harbor barber, and assistant fire chief literally for decades. So I couldn't speak with Willard. We just didn't have a chance to, to make it happen because time is what it was with the holidays and everything. But I know he inspired Brian. And Brian's other son, who I think is in college right now, is also, a qualified firefighter. I think Brian told me that he is doing firefighting where his school is, up by Stout. He goes to the University of Wisconsin in Stout. So I thought that was kind of impressive. And now, okay, this is going to be really cute, so hold your breath. Here's Gordy Nelson, Gary, and Adam, and it's Adam's sister's little boy, Ethan. He wanted to be the fireman for Halloween, so they made sure he had his own little turnout suit, and I'm sure he will be, looking forward to joining in the family tradition one day soon. But I just thought that was really precious. And all done. Now, I know that was just what I was able to learn in the last several weeks. And believe me, I mean, there are so many, like I said, there were hundreds of people that should be mentioned. There are all kinds of special things that they've done to support the town, each other, save lives, all that. And I'm wondering if anyone has questions. I know that Brian wanted to be here tonight. I don't think he was. Did you make it? Yay! Because it seems like all these firemen do is either go training or go to meetings. And my biggest fear today was that there would be a fire. I think we've got all kinds of people that we can applaud here today. If you're a member of first responders at the Bailey's Harbor Fire Department, could you just stand up for a second? Just do it. Just do it. This is kind of, I guess, the Historical Society's way of saying thank you very much. And if there is more information that we should have, in the last 2 days, by some strange thing, I've gotten like a mountain of stuff that I've been waiting to get. But we're going to do our best to, have a nice archive to keep track of. And we will take a picture every year, I hope, and have a roster. So that won't be forgotten. It shouldn't be, I think. And I just, I have to thank all of you for being so great. How about some questions? How many firefighters do we have, Brian?
There's presently 37 on the roster, with about 24 that are mostly active.
So there are 24 who train regularly, but there are 37 that are available. Right. 12 first responders. Oh, we are very fortunate. We're very fortunate, and it's also, we have a little problem here, because I just realized two things. I didn't send my sign-up sheets around. I We've got to have, thanks Susie, got to know who's been here so that we can prove that we actually do stuff. And, and the other thing we'll send around is, we always pass the hat if you feel like, you want to support a little extra. Steve brought his favorite hat today. Thank you, Steve. And he's just starting it there, and it'll go around. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
How often do they have to train? I know they train clear. Do they have a certain amount of hours that's for the
We train pretty much on the whole midroad, or the whole meetings of Bailey's Harbor. We train every, oh gee, thanks Christy. We train every first Monday of the month. And pretty much that is our home meeting. Every third Tuesday, we have what we call our joint mid-door training, which is Bailey's Harbor, Ephraim, and Gibraltar. That goes on a rotating every third month. Depends on where we're at. Like last night, we had our third Tuesday meeting with mid-door. We actually practiced in Peninsula State Park.
Yeah, I saw them climbing the top of the tower.
Yeah, they had some different scenarios. Yeah, Caleb, don't laugh too hard. Where we had to do a lot of GPS training last night. That's a big thing. Boat training. We had guys out on the boat, being between Bailey's Harbor, Ephraim, and Gibraltar. We had those 3 boats out. So yeah, we do change it up monthly. We try to keep as fresh as we can with the training. Keep everybody kind of motivated and so forth.
Yes? Well, everything's in the details, isn't it? There you go. I have to start stealing a better quality of pen.
Leanne, we should thank them too for the grant that they got for the weather alert systems and the COD.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. Can you explain that, Brian?
Yeah.
Great.
Yearly, we do apply yearly for 2 different grant scenarios. One is a state grant, which is offered through the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. That kind of keeps us up to date with anything that we need for forest fires, grass fires, and so forth. That is a 50-50 grant. We're pretty much 100% on that application that we're able to get money depending on what we need. The other one is the FEMA grant, which is basically through the Federal Emergency Management Association. That is not always a given. This grant that we have now for the weather radios and the carbon monoxide detectors is only the 2nd grant that the town of Bailey's Harbor has been able, or successfully been able to get. I guess I'm kind of blessed. I do have 2 retired individuals that do work with me, and Bill and Phil. Phil was the one that actually wrote the grant for this, and the 2 of them have been, quite involved in getting this up and running. So I guess more so hats off to the 2 of them than myself on that one.
I'm listening to you, and I was thinking something I forgot to say before. When I was showing the tradition, in the Zoc family and the Nelson family and firefighting, they're not the only ones. I was talking to Sharon yesterday and today. She was a very early first responder, and both her sisters, Kay and Kim, and Casey Oldenburg, which is Kim's daughter. I'm sorry, it's only been like 50 years. I can't get that straight. I can't tell Joe and Jerry apart either after all this. I don't know. It's me. It's just me. But I think that I think once you get into that, it has so much meaning, and you see what you're accomplishing, that you want to carry it forward. At least that's what it looks like to me, I think.
For anybody who had one of those weather radios the other night, mine had never gone off since I had it. And when I was up out of bed, I was looking for an ambulance, and something parked in my yard. It was awesome. It was awesome, I think.
So they really work.
Yes, they are.
Good to know.
One night.
Yeah,
So should everybody have one of those, Brian?
Yeah, there's been, everybody at some fashion or another should have got a postcard in the mail, being either a seasonal or permanent resident. Okay, if not, definitely, we did have a sign-up sheet at the pancake breakfast where we picked up, I think, what, about another 50 signatures, Phil? Okay, on that, I do believe at this point, when the last that I talked with Phil and Bill, we're up to what, about 207, something like that, sign-ups for those? Somewhere in that bracket, okay? I think we initially purchased through the grant somewhere around 400 units, okay? So if you did not sign up for the weather radio or the carbon monoxide detector, you can call the fire station and leave a message on the answering machine. Either Bill, Phil, or whoever gets the message at that point will get back to you for that install. But yes, definitely it is something, there is no cost to you with the install on the weather radio and the CO detector. Part of the grant was to come in and do a free home inspection. You know, where we'll send a crew of 2 or 3 guys out for the install, and then they basically run through at your convenience or whatever you're willing to do, and kind of do a free home inspection.
Oh, and they'll just like inspect your home to make sure that it's fire safe?
Correct.
That's a very valuable thing. That's very cool. I like that.
So do you need a weather radio, Leanne?
I guess I do. But I wanted to ask you, now I have electric, my house is all electric. Do I need a carbon monoxide detector?
In all, you should.
You should, okay. Because, okay, if you say so.
They inspected mine, they said you've got a good fire extinguisher, but it's no good. So I've only had it 20 years. I've got a new one now.
Way to go.
And we do have a question, where do you dispose of the old one?
Oh, where do you, well, where do you dispose of the old fire
I was
extinguishers?
told to take it by the fire department and leave it there. And they would do something with it. Either, Gary said you would use it in training, or if it wasn't active, you'd throw it away.
Yeah, what we can do is use them in training. Generally, there's 2 scenarios. There's vans, fire and safety, they'll take them. And what's the other one? Is it Allied, Caleb? Yeah, there's two companies that will end up taking them and recycling them, basically. Other than us discharging them for practice, that's about the only thing we can do, and then we got to get rid of the canister.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yes, Jane?
A couple of questions. How many hours of training do you have to have before you become a volunteer firefighter? And what does it turn out? Outfit cost per volunteer?
To get you to firefighter 1 level, it is 60 hours. Okay, that only gets you to firefighter 1. Then there's firefighter cert, which is another 60 hours, Caleb, correct? And 60, so it's 120 to get you just certified, okay?
Wow.
Turnout gear, it's no small investment. A pager is $650.
Do you buy your own of all these things?
No, this is all supplied by the town.
Oh.
Oh, God. I wouldn't have anybody on my department if everybody had to buy it on their own. No, $650 for a pager. And then for a full set of turnout gear, which would be inclusive of a set of boots, a set of bunker pants, bunker jacket, helmet, Nomex hood, and gloves, we're talking somewhere in that $3,400 to $3,600 bracket per person. Now with that in mind, I've got set up with a program where each person has a set of 2 gear, or a set of 2 PPE. And the reason being is if we go out on a call, after every call, that set of gear has to be washed.
Oh.
It has to be washed because there's the carcinogens from a fire, and you don't want anybody getting cancer. So we do have a big in-house washing machine where everybody has to wash their gear. So with that in mind, if we do have another set, then we're ready to go with that. So generally, only one pager, one set of boots, but the pants and the jacket and so forth. So you're looking about each person, that's $7,500, $8,000 bracket just for equipment.
Now, when I was working on this, Don, gave us his jacket to show and to try on if you wanted to punish yourself. And Melanie Haas also sent her little itty bitty, one of her old uniforms in. And that's her hat. And back when, this was some time ago, but she showed me on her hat, it says number 18 on there. Well, it was originally number 15, but I think there was like a shortage of funds at the time. So they had a magic marker in the 8s. So, I mean, these things can be quite serious. Do you find that the town is good about supporting the fire?
Yeah. Generally, everybody's been in agreement. There's some things that we've had to back off on, trying to keep up with where we need to be.
And doesn't your gear have to be very up to date? I mean,
yeah,
isn't that stuff
it's
like
generally
forbidden?
a lifespan of about 10 years. So,
Okay.
you think about that, every 10 years we're changing over. With that, kind of like what I said with what you elaborated, Leanne, on the pancake breakfast. With that, to kind of take off what you were saying, with that pancake breakfast, since Don and I started that, generally we average profit, let's put it that way, of about $4,000 a year in about 2.5 hours.
Very nice.
So with that, we've been able to take back and turn back to the town in a couple different purchases, I guess, let's put it that way. I guess the first big purchase that we were able to, between the pancake breakfast and miscellaneous donations, was the 6-wheeler, the ATV unit that's here in town now. With that, we have that on a trailer. It is equipped with a pump that we're able to use for grass fires, brush fires, and that's on a trailer. The next thing that we were able to purchase back to the town was a thermal imaging camera, and we did that 3 years ago, Caleb? 2 years ago? Yeah, it kind of all fills in, but I think it was about, let's say, 2 years ago. That was a ticketed item that we had one. It was an outdated thermal imaging camera back when they first came out. So what we were able to do with that is the town wasn't finding it as a budgeted item for that year. We were able to take and turn an $8,700 purchase back into the town through our pancake breakfast. Then the last one that we just did here was last year, which became quite profitable. On our end of it, we sold the old brush truck, which was a 1977 Ford, okay, as everybody kind of maybe's heard, not heard. We put that for sale on auction through Wisconsin Surplus. I think the initial purchase of that truck, Gary, was, what did you find? It was under $10,000, right? It was like $8,000 and change maybe. We sold that truck on auction. I think it went for, what, 24,000, Brad? Huh? 21,000? Okay, it was
I want you to
it was
sell my
kind of
car for
comical
me.
that some of us were watching on there what it actually went for. So with that, we were able to take that. The town took that purchase on that auction. And through the pancake breakfast, what we were able to do, again, we covered the cost difference of purchasing of a brand new Chevy pickup truck. We were able to put a capot on it and then miscellaneous accessories. That now becomes the tow vehicle as necessary for the boat if we have to go on a rescue call. Outside of the marina if we pull it out. And then the other thing it does is it does pull our 6-wheel unit.
That's really great. So. Is there anybody else that, Jumbo? No, you're not Jumbo.
No, but I
I'm
just
sorry.
want to comment that you should really appreciate your volunteer firemen because
We do appreciate them. There's no doubt about it. Thank you for that. And Roy, did you have some comment?
Yes, I was pleased to know when I renewed my home insurance, the fire department has moved my insurance bill. So thank you very much. Yes.
Oh, there. I don't know if you could hear or not because Roy didn't have the microphone, but he said that when he paid his home insurance this year, the department's rating had gone up to the point where he saved money on his fire insurance. That's a pretty practical payback for everybody. Very nice. Very good. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Brian, and thank you for helping me understand and for being here tonight. It really was great, and all the rest of you too. You know, we thank you, and I just love that you could turn out like you did.